Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 556, The Brain Within Its Groove. Now, it is fun to read these poems in the order in which they are provided to us in the Johnson edition, because we can easily start to connect them together. So for example, you're going to see this poem connecting rather easily with the 555 poem that we just finished, Trust in the Unexpected. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you did work through our set of introductory comments. I'm really hopeful that you can place this poem among our prior study of all earlier 555 poems. As we said, we just worked with 555, Trust in the Unexpected. Now, if you have done that reading of the previous 555 poems, you know that Emily is the queen of the poetic metaphor. There are a few poets who can play the game as well with metaphor as Emily does, and she'll play it again here for us. Now, Emily is interested in this poem in rhythms and in the value that these rhythms can give to us, but also the danger of having expected rhythms. Because what happens when something unexpected does happen to your rhythms and it kind of imbalances you or knocks you off your equilibrium? She's going to talk about what that is like. Now, we don't know why specifically she's going to talk right now about what happened when you lose your groove. We'll end up as well talking about the contemporary American thinker Henry David Thoreau when we finish with our reading of this poem. She says it this way: "The brain within its groove runs evenly and true, but let a splinter swerve. 'Twere easier for you to put a current back when floods have slit the hills and scooped a turnpike for themselves and trodden out the mills." By the way, did you notice all those compelling verbs? Let's circle them as we work through our process here. She'll begin with the brain, but it's clear she means the mind, doesn't she? Within its groove is interesting. What does she mean by groove? That is to say, maybe the rhythms that we are working with, right? Now we're going to come to our study of Thoreau here in a bit, and the conclusion of Walden, where Thoreau will maybe have a little different take on the advantages or disadvantages of what he will call ruts. We'll get to it in a moment. The brain within its groove runs evenly and true. In other words, when everything is happening in your life the way you kind of expect it, everything is copacetic, everything is kosher, everything is the way it's supposed to be. You are in your groove. And of course, some of you can smile to think about the film you were maybe raised on, The Emperor's New Groove, and the idea that you've thrown off his groove, which means something bad is happening. Notice, the brain within its groove runs evenly and true, but let a splinter swerve. We saw swerve in 292. We'll see it again in 573, right? And again, the verbs here are compelling. Let a splinter swerve. Something all of a sudden kind of blows up your rhythms. Things don't go according to plan. What's that like? Well, her metaphor here is you might as well try to put a current water back when floods have, notice, slit the hills. By the way, slit we saw in 362. We'll see it again in 606. And scooped a turnpike for themselves and trodden out the mills. In other words, it is easier to put your life back to normal rhythms than it is to, stop a flood from coming, the waves that are coming. In other words, it's, what are we going to say at 2a? Any disruption in our rhythms have a tendency to just dislocate us in powerful ways. And no matter if we think we're trusting the unexpected, when the unexpected splinter arrives, whatever that is, a splinter in the brain. Think of that powerful image, right? In other words, something messes with the way we think, and then all of a sudden, we're a little bit confused, we're a little bit unsure of ourselves. At 2b, well, the verbs are powerful. Swerve, slit, scooped, trodden. I said we would come back to Thoreau. You'll remember at the end of Walden, at the conclusion, Thoreau tries to answer the question, why is it that you left the woods at Walden? And you'll remember that he said, I left for as good a reason as I went there. Perhaps I had several more lives to live, and I didn't have any more time to give to this one. Then he says this, quote, "It is remarkable how easily and insensibly we fall into a particular route," Emily will call it a groove, "and make a beaten track for ourselves. He says about Walden, I had not lived there a week before my feet wore a path from my door to the pond side, and though it's been 5 or 6 years since I trod it, it's still quite distinct. It's true, I fear that others may have fallen into it, and so help to keep it open. And then he says this, the surface of the earth is soft and impressible by the feet of men, and so with the paths which the mind travels. Emily calls it the brain. How worn and dusty then must be the highways of the world. How deep the ruts of tradition and conformity. I love that in 303, as we define learning as connecting new information to old information in meaningful ways, that we can take two passages like this of contemporaries and see the way they align. Finally, in 3b, what was a time that a splinter disrupted your mind and messed up your rhythms, and you had to figure out ways to get through that? Thank you.